It was a Tuesday morning in late November, and the temperature outside had already dropped to -14. I remember because I'd checked my phone when I heard my mother coughing through the wall, that dry, rattling kind of cough that doesn't sound like a cold. It sounds like something worse. She was staying in our spare room. Had been for 3 weeks, ever since her doctor in Sudbury told her the shortness of breath wasn't just the weather. She was 79 years old, and she'd driven herself to that appointment alone, because that's the kind of woman she was. She called me afterward, calm as anything, and said, "I think you should know what he said." And I drove the 4.5 hours the next morning without telling my wife until I was already on the 400. My wife wasn't pleased about that, but I'll get to that. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years working in municipal engineering for the city of Ottawa, and I thought, genuinely believed, that by the time I reached this stage of life, I'd have figured out who I could count on. My wife and I had been married for 26 years. We met at a colleague's retirement party, of all places. She was sharp, funny, direct. I liked that about her. We built something together. A house in Barhaven, 2 kids who grew up and moved west, a life that looked from the outside like it worked. But a marriage isn't what it looks like from the outside. My mother had always been polite to my wife. More than polite, she'd made every effort. Christmas dinners, birthday cards, remembered her coffee order. My wife was civil in return. Civil. That word always bothered me more than I let on. You're civil to a neighbor you don't particularly like. You're civil to someone at a town hall meeting who keeps raising their hand. You don't have to be civil to someone's mother. You can choose to be kind. The coughing got worse by 5:30 in the morning. I got up, went to the hallway, knocked gently on her door. She was sitting up in bed, hand on her chest, face pale in a way that made my stomach drop. "I think I need to go in," she said. She never dramatized anything. If she said she needed to go in, she needed to go in. My car was at the dealership. A routine service that had turned into a transmission issue. They'd called the afternoon before to say it wouldn't be ready until Thursday. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. I had 2 days off. My wife worked from home on Tuesdays. Her car was in the driveway. It hadn't occurred to me that access to that car would become a problem. I went to our bedroom. She was awake. I could tell by her breathing. I said quietly, "I need to take your car. My mother needs the hospital." She didn't move, didn't turn over. "I have a client call at 8, she said. "I need the car to get coffee and set up before." I stood there for a moment. "She's not well. I need to take her now." "There's a Shoppers 2 blocks away." "She can wait." I want to be honest about what happened next, because I think about it still. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I said, "Okay," and I closed the door. I called my neighbor, a retired school teacher from Gloucester who'd lived next door for 12 years. He answered on the second ring, didn't hesitate, said he'd be out front in 5 minutes. I helped my mother into her coat, her boots, wrapped a scarf around her the way she used to do for me when I was small. She didn't ask about my wife. She'd stopped asking questions like that a long time ago. At the CHIO, no, we went to the Civic, the Ottawa Civic Hospital. We were there by 6:15. They took her back within 20 minutes because her oxygen saturation was low enough to move quickly. A nurse with kind eyes told me to find a seat, and they'd come get me when they knew more. I sat in that waiting room for 2 hours and 40 minutes. I drank bad coffee from a vending machine. I watched the news on a muted television screen. I texted my 2 daughters, one in Calgary, one in Vancouver, to let them know their grandmother was being seen. I did not text my wife. She texted me at 8:47. It said, "How long are you going to be? I need the grocery list for Superstore." I put my phone face down on the seat beside me. The doctor came out just after 9. "Pneumonia," she said. Not severe enough for ICU, but she'd be admitted for at least 4 days, maybe 5. They'd started her on IV antibiotics. She was stable, resting. I could see her in about an hour. I sat back down and I thought about the word stable. How much weight it carries when it's your mother. My wife called just after 10. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. I answered the third time. Where are you still? I thought this would be a quick thing. I told her my mother had been admitted with pneumonia. There was a pause then. Is it serious? It's pneumonia. She's 79. Yes, it's serious. Another pause. Well, do you need me to do anything? I said no. I said I'd figure it out. I don't know if she heard the echo of her own words. I suspect she did. I suspect it didn't matter to her the way I wanted it to. I stayed at the hospital most of that day. My neighbor came by mid-afternoon with a sandwich from the Tim Hortons near the hospital. Roast beef on a Kaiser, my usual. He sat with me for an hour, didn't say much, and that was exactly right. When I drove him home in my wife's car, he patted my shoulder at the curb and said, "She's a tough woman, your mother." She was. She really was. My wife was on a video call when I got home. She muted herself long enough to say, "There's pasta on the stove," and then turned back to her screen. I ate alone at the kitchen table, looking out at the backyard, at the bird feeder my mother had given us 6 years ago that still hung from the old maple. I thought about all the Sundays my mother had sat at this same table, drinking tea, doing her crossword, making herself small so she wouldn't inconvenience anyone. She had always been inconvenient to my wife. I just hadn't said it plainly to myself until then. Over the next 4 days, I drove to the Civic twice a day, morning and evening. I brought my mother things she asked for, her reading glasses, her library book, her own pillow in the green pillowcase. My daughter in Calgary flew in on the third day, took the red eye, showed up at my door at 6 in the morning with a carry-on bag and red eyes and said, "I just needed to be here." I hugged her for a long time. My wife said it was nice that she came. She said it from the couch, not looking up from her laptop. I want to be fair. She didn't say anything cruel during those 4 days. She made coffee in the mornings. She asked occasionally for updates. But there was something absent in her that I'd been trying not to name for years, and standing in a hospital corridor at 7 in the evening, watching my mother sleep through the glass, I finally let myself name it. Indifference, not cruelty, just the quiet, steady absence of care. My mother came home, my home, on a Saturday. The doctor gave us a list of things to watch for, a prescription for oral antibiotics, a follow-up date in 3 weeks. My daughter helped me set up the spare room properly this time. Bed elevated slightly, extra blankets, a little table with her water and her pills, and her book within arm's reach. My wife went to her book club that evening. I don't know exactly when I started noticing the money. It wasn't dramatic. It was the kind of thing that sneaks up on you, a number that doesn't add up, a transfer you don't remember authorizing, a balance that's lower than it should be. We had a joint account, had for 22 years. It was where our household money lived, mortgage, utilities, groceries, property tax. We both contributed to it monthly by automatic transfer. We'd never had a reason to scrutinize it closely. I started scrutinizing it in December, my daughter. In Calgary had asked me to look at refinancing the house. Not to sell, just to understand our options. I'd pulled up the statements to get a clear picture of what was coming in and going out. And there it was. A series of transfers, not large enough to trigger alarm on their own, but consistent. Every 2 to 3 weeks, starting about 8 months back, between $2,000 and $3,500 each time. Always to the same external account. I didn't recognize the account number. I sat at the kitchen table with those statements for a long time. Then I got up, made myself a cup of tea, and sat back down. $44,000, over 8 months. Gone from our joint account to a place I couldn't identify. I want to tell you that I confronted her that night, that there was a scene, that things came out in a rush. But that's not what happened. What happened was that I closed the laptop, finished my tea, and went to bed. And I lay there in the dark, listening to her breathing beside me. And I understood that I needed to think before I spoke. I'd learned that much in 63 years. The next morning I called my financial advisor. He'd been handling my RRSP and investment accounts for 11 years, and he was direct and practical, which is what I needed. I told him what I'd found. He told me to document everything, screenshots, printouts, dates, and to call a family lawyer before I said a word to my wife. I asked him if he was sure. If the money's going where I think it's going, he said carefully. Then you've already been living in a different marriage than you thought. Don't make any moves until you know exactly what you're dealing with. I documented everything. The lawyer I found was a woman in Canada, recommended by a friend from my old engineering team who'd been through a divorce 3 years earlier. She met with me the following week. She was thorough and calm, and she didn't let me fill the silence with reassurances I didn't mean. She asked questions. I answered them. By the end of the hour, she had a clear picture, and so did I. The transfers had gone to a personal account in my wife's name alone, an account I hadn't known existed. She'd opened it 14 months ago at a different branch than the one we used together. The lawyer said this wasn't uncommon. She said the word dissipation and explained what it meant in the context of matrimonial property law in Ontario. I nodded and wrote it down. The house was jointly owned. That was important. My pension, federal employee, defined benefit, 31 years, was mine, but would factor into equalization. The joint account was the clearest evidence of what had been taken. She asked me if I wanted to pursue divorce or separation. I said I wanted to do whatever put me in the strongest position to protect what I'd built. She said that was the right answer. I drove home from that meeting along the Queensway in the dark, and I thought about the Tuesday morning in November when I'd stood in our bedroom doorway and told my wife that my mother needed to go to the hospital. I thought about the pause, the client call, the coffee, and then I thought about my mother in her green pillowcase, sitting up in that hospital bed, never once asking why my wife hadn't come. She already knew. She'd known for years. She just hadn't said it, because she didn't want to be a burden. The hardest conversation I had wasn't with my wife. It was with my mother, a few days after I'd spoken to the lawyer. She was feeling better by then. Color in her face, appetite returning. Back to her crossword in the mornings. I sat across from her at the kitchen table, and I told her quietly what I'd found, what I was doing about it. She didn't say anything for a long time. She looked out at the backyard at the bird feeder. Then she said, "I'm sorry you're going through this. Not I told you so. Not I always had a feeling. Just, I'm sorry. I had to look away for a minute." "You don't have to be sorry," I said. "I know," she said. "I am anyway." I told my wife on a Thursday evening in January. My daughter in Calgary knew. I'd called her before I said anything. My daughter in Vancouver knew. My neighbor knew. The lawyer knew. I'd made sure I wasn't alone in this before I walked into it. My wife was in the kitchen when I came home. She had that look she sometimes gets, a kind of deliberate busyness, like she was aware something was coming and needed to seem occupied. I've known her long enough to read it. I sat down at the table. I didn't raise my voice. I put the printed bank statements in front of her and I said, "I need you to explain these transfers." The silence that followed was different from the silence on the November morning. That silence had been indifferent. This one was afraid. She said the money had been for something personal, private. She said she'd planned to put it back. She said there were things I didn't understand about where her head had been. I said, "I'm sure that's true." I told her I'd spoken to a lawyer. I told her the process would begin and that I expected her to respond through her own counsel. I told her she was welcome to stay in the house for the time being, or to make other arrangements. I would not be leaving. The house was half mine. My mother was staying in the spare room for as long as she needed to. She asked if there was any chance we could talk about this differently. I said, "I think we've run out of ways to talk about things differently," she cried. "I want to be honest about that too," she cried, and part of me wanted to reach across the table. 26 years is 26 years. But I thought about the hospital waiting room, the muted television, the vending machine coffee, the sandwich my neighbor brought, and I kept my hands flat on the table. The divorce process in Ontario takes time. There's a mandatory 1-year separation period if you're not pursuing fault-based grounds, though our lawyer looked carefully at the financial transfers, and there was a possibility of demonstrating something more immediate. I'll leave the legal details to the people who handle legal details. What I can tell you is that by February I'd changed the access on the joint account, transferred my direct deposits to my personal account, and engaged a chartered accountant to help document the full picture for equalization purposes. She moved to her sister's place in Nepean in early March. Before she left, she stood in the doorway of the kitchen, the same doorway I'd stood in on that November morning, and she said, "I hope you understand that I'm not a bad person." I thought about that for a moment. "I know you're not," I said, "but I also know what you did. Both things can be true." She nodded slowly, and then she was gone. My mother is doing well. She had her 3-week follow-up, then her 6-week, and the doctor says her lungs are clear. She's still in the spare room, and I've told her there's no rush. The room is hers as long as she wants it. She started putting her own things in it. A small lamp she likes. A photo of my father on the dresser. Her crossword books on the shelf. Some mornings I make coffee, and she comes out in her house coat, and we sit at the kitchen table together, not talking about much. She does her crossword. I read whatever's on my phone. The bird feeder outside has 3 chickadees who visit most mornings, and she knows all 3 of them by now, the way she knows things, quietly, without making a thing of it. My daughter in Calgary is coming for Easter. She's bringing her partner, who I like very much. My daughter in Vancouver is still deciding, but I think she'll come. The house feels different now, quieter in some ways, but not empty. There's a distinction there that took some time to understand. My phone did ring, by the way. In the weeks after she left, quite a few times. Some I answered, some I didn't. The conversations were mostly practical. Lawyers, accounts, paperwork. Once or twice there was something else in her voice. Something softer, and I tried to be decent about it without being pulled back into something I'd made a clear decision about. A man I used to work with told me once that the hardest thing about getting older isn't the body slowing down, or the friends you lose, or even the parents you're watching age. The hardest thing, he said, is recalibrating. Realizing that a story you thought you were in the middle of has actually been over for a while, and you just hadn't caught up to it yet. I thought about that a lot this winter. I think he was right. But here's what he didn't say, and maybe he just hadn't gotten there yet. There's something on the other side of that recalibration. Not a grand new beginning. Nothing like that. Just a quieter kind of clarity. A sense of the room as it actually is, not as you'd been hoping it might be. My mother knocked on my bedroom door at 6:45 on a Wednesday morning, about a month after she'd moved back in from the hospital. She was holding 2 cups of coffee. She handed me one through the doorway. "You looked tired yesterday," she said. I told her I was okay. She nodded. "I know you are," she said. "I just wanted to say thank you. For the night we drove to the hospital, for all of it." I told her she didn't need to thank me. "I know I don't," she said. "I'm doing it anyway." And she went back to her crossword, and I sat in bed with my coffee, listening to the January quiet. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough.